This program is part of American Graduate. Let's make it happen. A public media initiative made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
Good afternoon and welcome to a special live-streamed broadcast from WUWM, Milwaukee Public Radio, and Milwaukee Public Television, a serious conversation about Milwaukee's graduation problem. I'm Mitch Teich, the executive producer and co-host of Lake Effect on Milwaukee Public Radio, and I'll be guiding the conversation here today. I don't want to use the term moderating because what we're aiming to have over the next hour or so is an organic conversation, respectful but honest, about the challenges faced by Milwaukee schools, students, and the community at large. Statistics are often tough to wrap your mind around, but there is one number to keep in mind as we get this conversation going: 2,000. That's the number of students estimated between 7th and 12th grade who drop out of Milwaukee schools each year. Most of those students, hopefully none of them, started out in school expecting to leave the system without graduating. So what's happening to them? And what's happening to us as the Milwaukee community when these young people drop out? Before we start having at those questions and others, let's take a minute to go around the table and meet the people taking part in today's conversation. I'll have you each introduce yourself and tell us where you're from.
My name is Tyrone P. Dumas. I am an educational consultant with the Milwaukee Urban League, representing our president, Ralph Holman.
I'm Desiree Pointer-Mace. I'm the Associate Dean of the School of Education at Alverno.
Good afternoon, Jeannie Fenstroy, Greater Milwaukee Foundation, representing Ellen Gilligan from the Greater Milwaukee Foundation.
Good afternoon, I'm Michael Burke. I'm the president of Milwaukee Area Technical College.
And good afternoon, I'm Gerard Randall with the Milwaukee Partnership Academy.
I'm Denise Calloway, Milwaukee Public Schools.
Alan Borsick, Marquette Law School, and I write a column for the Journal Sentinel on Education.
Edie Turnbull with Admission Possible Milwaukee.
Well, thanks, first of all, to all of you for being part of this conversation. And let me throw this question out there, and we'll see where it leads us. And I encourage you to just jump in as you have something to add. If you want to give us some perspective on why you're coming from where you're coming from, that would be great. At its heart, this seems like such an easy problem to comprehend. Too many students are dropping out of school before they graduate. It's such a specific problem, so why is it so hard to find the right approach to combat it?
Well, I think that's because there are lots of different reasons that students drop out. It's a complex problem, and because it is complex, there's no easy answer or easy solution. But there's some things that we know about dropouts that can really help guide our actions around that. We know that kids who drop out are much more likely to have lower attendance rates, higher suspension rates, and they're much more likely to score poorly in those core academic subjects. So if we know those things about dropouts, it gives us the ability, and it particularly gives us the ability as a district, to begin to plan a roadmap to address those issues that can help us make improvements in those areas. And we are seeing some improvements.
Well, I hope you'll talk about that roadmap momentarily, but I'm curious to hear others chime in as to why this is such a difficult, many-headed problem.
Well, I think just from the perspective of somebody who prepares teachers, I think part of the challenge is how do you create schools that kids want to stay in? And so I think that there's a lot of dimensions of that as well. Is it that the curriculum could be more engaging? Is it that the kinds of things that we believe school is for are not actually being delivered upon? Is it that the kind of people that we're putting in front of children are not prepared to act as their advocates, cheerleaders, disciplinarians, and so on? So I think that there are lots of places where the role of the teacher comes into this pretty heavily.
Are we putting too much on the schools?
No, if I could, I think part of this issue you have to look at it in the context that we live in. This is a city that's fourth in the nation in poverty, and for many of the students that I see, they come to us having dropped out. We spend a good deal of time and effort. We graduate 1,400 GEDs every year. We spend the time, invest them, so give them a chance to get back into the labor market. But most of the students I've talked to who are later in life returning to us, life intervened for them, and they live very challenging, very complex lives as young adults, and often drop out of school to go to work, to support their families for any number of reasons. And I don't frankly think we have a full understanding of that.
Well, and those are factors that seem to speak to this not just being an issue of creating schools that the students want to be in. This makes it sound like an issue that exists well outside the school walls as well.
Yeah. Well, of course that's true, and you can't ignore the factors in kids' lives. If with the vast majority of dropouts, frankly, if they'd been born into different circumstances, they wouldn't be dropouts. But you can't change that fact. You can't change the lives they lead, at least not very easily. So your question, going back to your question, is it fair to schools? In an ideal world, of course not. In the real world, yes, because that's where you got the kids. You can't go into their bedrooms. You can't go into their homes, at least not very easily. You got them at least for that 6-7 hours a day, and in some cases more. And to say, we need help, we need to do better, we need to have more success, it may not be fair, but it's the most realistic option.
Well, and as we promoted this broadcast and asked for people to submit questions for it, the issue that came in time and again is, well, hey, what about parental involvement? What about outside the school walls? Does that need to be something that schools are reaching out for? Does there need to be some better effort for schools not just to reach the students, but reach their families?
Schools do reach out to parents. In fact, that's probably been one of the greater thrust of Dr. Thornton's efforts as the superintendent for MPS, and that is to reach out to parents to encourage their involvement in their local schools. But part of what makes that difficult is that kids are all over the city. They're in a variety of different kinds of schools. They have different schedules. It does become a very challenging problem for parents to become more engaged in their kids' school lives. But then if you step back and you take a look at some of the problems that Denise mentioned or Dr. Burke had mentioned around poverty and the inability of parents to have jobs to support their families, and some parents that are working 2-3 jobs to support their families. So becoming engaged in school activities becomes more of a challenge because it's a lower priority given those other things they have to address.
I think that one of the issues that I've always been concerned with, and now working at the Urban League, I've found that they take it from both ends. They have academic achievement programs, they have jobs programs, they have Jobs for America's Graduates program. They even see them at GED program in cooperation with the MATC. They see them at people coming in to now get jobs, driver's license, restaurant. They see them at all ends of the spectrum, and yet this issue continues to persist. I take it from being a person who understands that we had dropouts 60s, 70s, and 80s, but there was a factory to go to if you dropped out. There was a job you could go get if you dropped out. But now I see a devaluing of education in some people that is not as important that they say. One example real quickly. They found a child few years ago who was caught by one of the dropout prevention, and the sheriff took him to the site, and they called the mom, and she came in, and she said, "Oh, I had him quit. He don't need no more. He's taking care of his brothers and sisters." And so we started to talk about, well, what made that parent decide that a kid with a 7th grade education doesn't need any more education? So that whole devaluing of education from some aspects of people in the community, some parents who don't think it's important, goes down to the children who start to believe it's not important. So how do we change that perspective?
This is the idea of a culture of low expectations?
That people start to believe that I only need just enough to get by, and the kids start to believe it, and then you see folks, and then you have a whole history of peer groups and heroes. Now, the heroes they worship now in music, in entertainment, and industry don't preach education. They preach music. Whereas in my generation, we had heroes who actually told us that education was important. So now what do their heroes say? And sometimes you have to combat their heroes who they see being successful with money and jewelry, saying education is not a big deal. Look what we did. We dropped out. We made it. And so, trying to counter that is part of this educational outcomes that you want, and conquering all of it, from the personal side, the inner growth side, but also from the academic and other sides.
I see one of the things that this is related to is around this emerging dialogue around college and career readiness. And I think as we're able to get increasingly explicit about not only that you get a degree, but what that actually means and what it means that you know and are able to do, so that at Dr. Burke's institution, they're not just getting a piece of paper that's a GED, but that's carrying with it some rigor and some evidence that they've accomplished a set of things. And so I think that increasingly there are programs like, for example, Gear Up that's been recently launched in MPS that's going to really look at what it's going to mean to get some high-need kids to be college and career ready, and to describe exactly what that's going to have to mean.
I had an interesting experience earlier this fall. I was visiting high school in a very upper-income, very college-oriented community, and the principal said to me, our kids, in 7th grade, they had a pretty good idea where they were going to go to college and what they wanted to do, and they're making their course choices based on that. They're just focused on that. They're very driven. You don't see that very much in the city of Milwaukee. I subsequently described it as a realistic dream gap, that you've got race gaps, you got income gaps, you got class gaps, you got lots of gaps, but one of them is the dreams that kids have, and especially giving them realistic dreams that are constructive, healthy, and doable. And that sense of filling kids' heads with good dreams is a real crisis in itself.
Well, that's one of the things that we're spending a lot of time on under Dr. Thornton's leadership, to really talk to kids about the importance of being college ready. And that's a very deliberate term, because it's not just about the fact that you're going to go to college and you know where you're going to go to college. It's that you have the skill set that lets you make that choice. So Gear Up was mentioned as one of the things that we're doing. We just announced a new program called the Degree Project, where students in select MPS high schools will now be eligible for up to $12,000 in scholarships when they graduate from college or from high school on time. We're now starting to build. We now have, for the first time, we have counselors, guidance counselors, assigned to all of our schools. So we begin to talk to kids in elementary school about the importance of thinking about what you want to do, planning to do that, working to do that. So by the time our students then get to middle school, they are starting to have those thoughts about what they want to do. I mean, part of it, I think, too, is what are the expectations that we have in this community for all children? We do not have equal expectations in this community for all children. So as a community, when we take a look at what our responsibility is, part of that responsibility is expecting that all children will have that same college-going thought process, that that's part of their future, and as a community, really working to help those students who don't have those parents who might be resources to do that. And that's another thing that we're doing with our college access centers, putting that information right in communities so parents and students in elementary schools can begin to access that information.
I think that's a really important point, that the college piece be critical, because if the college piece isn't critical, then the value of the high school degree fades, frankly, because there are enough places where you can still get a job. It's not a great job, frankly, but it's a job. So but the only way that you can get into college is with that high school diploma. So therefore, that focus on that next step and the assumption that that is going to be your next step goes a long way in reinforcing the idea that the degree is important, because it's just the next step.
I think it's important, if you look at the skills gap component, that when I wanted to go to college and be an architect, it was strictly through the fact that I had all that industrial education. I had shop, metal, wood, all of those things. But today, to be a tradesperson, you have to have the same level of math, science, reading, and writing that this person who took the ACT and SAT to get into college. You have to have the same baseline of education to even be a tradesperson, because if I design it, you have to build it, you got to know what I know. But so you still can have both tracks. You just have to have a foundation that says to be an electrician, you need it, but the electrical engineer, you need the same thing.
Well, and so where do technical colleges and community colleges come into this equation? Because, clearly it's one thing to have college expectations and to breed a culture of college expectations, but I don't know that we're talking about breeding a culture of Ivy League college expectations for everyone, or even whether we should. So what is the role that community colleges and technical colleges play in this equation?
And how long do I have to answer that? I often refer to the jobs that young people are going to get without a high school degree as muck jobs. You know, they're the do you want fries with this kind of jobs. They're not family sustaining wages. They're not jobs where you'll ever have a mortgage, you'll ever buy a car. It is not, I don't think it's not the future of Milwaukee. The point that you raised, I think, is very important because a generation, 2 generations ago, there were factory jobs that were unskilled labor. Those jobs have virtually evaporated in America. The professional job level, the percentage of professional jobs our economy requires has pretty much stayed static since the 50s. The doctor, the lawyer, the professional level positions. This skilled labor has grown dramatically. We now represent probably 54% of the jobs this decade will be for individuals, and this is not Mike Burke's data, it's the Department of Labor data. 54% of the jobs will require more than a high school diploma, but less than a baccalaureate degree. And that is, I think, our sweet spot. That is the bandwidth we have. God bless Marquette and UWM and all the universities that have those professional focuses. We need those graduates, but the 200-plus technical degrees we have here really provides, I think, a substantial opportunity for folks who don't have that kind of time, don't have that kind of money to spend 4, 5, 6 years to become professionals, need to support a family, need to find work that generates a family-sustaining income. And that's our bandwidth. That's our sweet spot, I think, in this economic development world. What I find a bit of a conundrum in all of this is, I think it speaks to your point. I noticed last fall, I asked our research people, we have 4,220 baccalaureate degree students here right now on our campus. That makes us the second largest graduate school in Wisconsin, which I find fascinating. There's something going on here because I think what we represent is industry certified skill sets. And this is coming from someone who has 2 degrees in English. And I'm not sure what I was thinking at the time.
You're speaking in English. So.
It was the 60s, it sounded like it. But in terms of a demonstrable skill set when I graduated, not so much. I think what our students and many students who are coming here from baccalaureate degree granting institutions come to us to get industry certified skill sets, which they can combine with the broad skills they have from a university and enter a workforce in a very unique niche. And they see it as perhaps putting more tools in their toolkit before they enter the workforce because they have industry certifications that it could be less than 1 year in some cases. Interesting dynamic going on, but to me, I think the more we can provide students an opportunity to have precisely what the industry that they want to work in, have precisely what the skill sets they need to enter that workforce, the better off we are. It's demonstrable, it's on a piece of paper, it's certified, the industry has bought into it. We've done them a great service.
I think also that we want to prepare people who can shift too, because we know the world of work is very different now, and that we aren't necessarily, even with industry certification, preparing somebody for a 40-year career in X industry. And so I think that some of the things that people are coming out of when you talk about these kinds of abilities is an ability to problem solve, is an ability to synthesize, all of these kinds of things that I think are not taught as much as they should be in K-12 and in college as explicit things that can be learned. And so when we think about college and career readiness, it's not just about what's that content knowledge that you need to be college and career ready, but what kind of stuff do you need to believe about yourself? How perseverant are you? How optimistic are you? These kinds of things that we know are characteristic of successful people and are perhaps not as much there with folks who are dropping out, folks who feel that people are not advocating for them, folks who don't feel at home in a school. And so how can we get really early on to get schools to think about developing that in kids?
And this maybe jumps into that area because we run the risk of getting far away from the actual kids that are dropping out. And maybe this is a touchy-feely question. But is there just a basic problem with lack of attention by parents, by teachers, by people that might intervene before it gets to the point that a student says, you know, I have better opportunities outside the school than inside the school?
Well, there's competition there for the attention or for the activities of young people. But I throw this out, that we oftentimes just wait far too late before we intervene. We've mentioned all kinds of interventions here that would prevent a high dropout rate, and yet we wait until they're almost at the point of dropping out before we become responsible and begin to put those interventions into play. Give you an example. 7th, 8th graders are dropping out in rapid numbers or in large numbers here in our community. The federal government now is trying to implement a policy that says instead of allowing for U.S. Department of Labor funding to be used for 14 and 15-year-olds for summer jobs, after school jobs, we'll wait until they're 17 or 18 years old. Well, a 14 or 15-year-old is not likely even to get the most basic of jobs in the fast food industry. Those kinds of jobs, when I was growing up, grass cutting, going out and shoveling someone's snow, you cobble delivering newspapers. You cobble together a number of activities that would pay so that you would have that experience and you could earn some money. Frankly, those jobs now are being held by adults. The very parents that are trying to support these kids. So we've waited too late for some of these interventions that, to me, make very good sense in helping to keep kids in school, keep them interested, keep them engaged until they are ready to drop out of school, and then it's far too late. Someone else has grabbed their attention.
I do think that attention is a critical piece, and that's what we've found with our program, because students are assigned to a coach who works with them 4 hours a week, every week throughout the entire school year. They have somebody, regardless of who or what wants them to drop from the program, who's advocating for them and saying, you can do this, you just got to stick with it. You can do this, you got to stick with it, over and over and over again. And a lot of times the message really doesn't sink in until they're in their spring semester of their senior year. Oh, I can do this. I've gotten admission to several colleges. I can do it. Hey, maybe I will. And there are a lot of kids who, if you give them that attention, they do stick with it, and they will stay in the program or in a school.
But there is sort of a resource deficit. To give the kids that kind of attention on a wide scale is going to take a lot of people with a lot of attention.
Well, I think that's true, but I also think perhaps one of the challenges that we have as a community, and quite frankly as a nation, because this isn't a problem that's unique to Milwaukee, is how we look at that idea of intervention and when does intervention begin. One of the things that we know is that we have children who, if they're not prepared for kindergarten or first grade, they come into school with a huge deficit that some of them can never make up. Mm-hmm. They don't have access to, they don't know their numbers, they don't know their colors. Their vocabulary, which is the key to learning, is so much lower than students who do have the ability to have a quality early childhood experience. So when we talk about interventions, one of the things that we can do, one of the things we're focused on in this district is how do we create more early childhood, quality early childhood educational opportunities for kids? Because that makes all the difference in the world in a child entering school. And it's hard for some people to think about that some kids can enter kindergarten at a deficit, but it does happen.
You're saying the forces that affect the dropout rate are kicking in
some
well
of them
before the
kick
kids are even
as kids are entering school. If you are, as some children are who are low income, who've not had access to quality childhood education programs, if you're entering kindergarten knowing a third of the words that a child sitting next to you does, you're already at a deficit. So how do we take a look at ways where we can increase quality early childhood educational opportunities for all kids? Because that has been shown to pay off and make a difference down the road.
And that all can't be laid at the doorstep of MPS
That's parents.
to address, given that you've got well over a third of those kids in early childhood programs, whether they're high quality or modest quality, that that are not MPS program attenders.
Yeah, and I'd like to jump in here. The Milwaukee Succeeds initiative, which many of you have heard about, and many of the people on this panel are partners with us on, is looking at a cradle-to-career model for every child in every school, cradle-to-career, success for all children. It's child-focused, and just like Denise said, we believe a child has to have high-quality early childhood care and education, and it even goes back further than that to the healthy prenatal measures that we're going to be looking at. But I do believe it starts a lot earlier than 7th grade, as Gerard mentioned.
And one of the economic issues in our community of housing is that we have this high mobility rate, which is actually skyrocketed in this economy, where you got a child showing up in a first grade class now, this week, who doesn't have colors, is what Denise said. All of these deficiencies now, they're sitting next to a child, and that teacher now has got 5 months to bring them up to speed, missing another 3 months that they weren't, and they were never in a school. And so you ask the parent, what were you thinking? Did anybody talk to you about making sure this child could have some word comprehension, being able to write their name, know their address, these basic things you need to have, at least in first, you're talking about K4, and we're talking about that they've got to first grade and don't know these things, and so they're already behind, and yet you have a system that has to find a way to bring them up to speed if it can catch up with them. So by the time they get to 8th grade, are they so frustrated that when they get to 9th grade, they get there and go, I can't do none of this. And then all of a sudden they're out on the streets because now there's somebody, as Gerard said, luring them saying, I got another career for you. I got another option for you. And that option usually is negative and leads you to a negative outcome.
I think also, though, one of the things is, as Alan said, once we got them in school, at least we've addressed the problem of diaspora, right? When they're sort of unknown 3-year-olds in Milwaukee, it's harder for us to gather them in and intervene. But I think that, and some of these things, as Jeannie and others mentioned, require a great deal of investment of resources, this kind of thing, to turn a large ship. But I think other things can be done very simply and easily. And for example, with my students who are preparing to become teachers, one of the stems that I borrowed from my advising colleagues was to say, whenever I'm intervening with somebody, I want you to be successful. And so, and that basically is what I think all teachers can do. If you say that a lot, and if you believe it a lot, then that means that you're doing a bunch of different things in your classroom. And I think that some of those things are just instilling in the teacher basically this commitment to the level of success of each child in his or her care.
What I see with Milwaukee Succeeds that I think is powerful is a systemic vision, because I don't think there's any silver bullet here. It is stunning to think of a child entering kindergarten behind. It's just, it's unfathomable to think that that's happening. But we're not talking about K through 12 with Milwaukee Succeeds. We're talking from cradle to career, and that they are not successful until they have a career. It's not graduating from high school. It's not graduating from college or technical college or whatever it is. It is a very systemic view of this. So I think the power lies in the power of the people in that room who are looking at the systemic issues that really infringe upon young people being successful. But that said, I'd like to get to your point, which I think is profound. And you were worried about moderating this session, weren't you?
I try to be moderate anyway.
Yeah. The young people I talk to on my campus, and I talk to a lot of them, what terrifies me, I guess, and what keeps me up at night is the sense of that I see in their eyes of they don't have a sense of self-efficacy, if that makes sense. They do not believe that if they do what they're supposed to do and do all the work they're supposed to do and come to class and complete the assignments and read the book and take the test and do all the things that we expect of them, that the system will work for them. They really don't believe that. And they've got 18, 19 years of anecdotal evidence to the contrary, that the system just doesn't work for them. So that lack of self-efficacy, if I had a magic wand, I think, and I think that's what you're talking about, is what is needed here. I think by the time I see them in the hallway, I don't know that I can, what do I say to turn that around?
I had a parent a few years ago who was sent to me and asked because she said her son had he was doing so in the school, but he had believed that this label of special ed, he started to live it. She said, I want him to know he's smart, but he's starting to believe that these behaviors are just the way he's supposed to behave because he's been labeled special ed most of his life. So I spent almost a year working with this kid, just trying to get him to feel good about himself, to know that he had the possibility, and I found out he was good in biology. So I used that to say, well, that means you have some skills. Let's not worry about where you think your deficiencies are. Let's worry about, but that's that mentoring role, that role you're talking about, that cradle to grave. How do we find enough people to be around children to give them the kind of expectations and support necessary for them to believe? Because working in many of the environments I work in, and I see now, there is this kind of lack of hope at the 7th and 8th grade level, saying, well, this is my role. This is what's for me. That's all I have, and starting to believe that's all I can only get to hear. That's for somebody else, and that's really hard to work at. But you have to believe that you can work at it with those children that need to have that inner feeling about themselves, the inner confidence.
I think we're kind of leaving the content of what goes on in the schools out of the conversation, and that is an important element. There are schools that are succeeding with these same kids.
That's correct.
In instilling more of not only academics, but a vision of their future, better behavior, better work skills, the soft skills that employers are looking for, a commitment to pursuing these visions. And frankly, I've been in enough schools in Milwaukee, not only in MPS, but some of the non-MPS schools, where I don't see those things going on. I see programs that don't have rigor, that don't have real dedicated staff, very energized staff. I think we really do have to focus on what the schools themselves are doing and how they can do it better. Better teaching, better programs, better principals, a better sense of mission for everyone in the school, from the kids through the principal. There are deficiencies there, not in every school, but in a pretty good number of schools, and that's part of the problem.
Is this a function of teachers having so much else on their plate that frankly, motivating their students can't, in their mind, be part of it, or is there a more fundamental question about?
It's a function of 1,000 things, but yeah, I mean, it's a function of a system that in itself hasn't pushed itself to be better as much as it should. You know, the graduation rate has gone up. The dropout rate has gone down in MPS, and by a significant margin. About the late 90s, it was about 50%. It was up as high as 70%, depending on how you measure it. The state now is using a different system, which actually lowered the totals, but it's still definitely up from where it was. What hasn't gone up are any indicators of academic success. ACT scores, WKC scores, attendance, success in college.
Yeah. And that's not quite
just let me
correct,
finish.
though. It really isn't quite correct, Alan.
We'll let Alan finish. And then
Yeah, that's fine.
And you need to start seeing those results to say we're really doing better. And the system needs to feel more heat to come through on those scores, not simply to get kids to a diploma, but to get them to a diploma that's meaningful.
Well, we don't need to feel more heat. We already feel the heat. So it's not something that needs to be brought to us or imposed from the outside. It's heat that we feel now internally and that we're working towards. So let's talk about what some of the facts are in terms of what we are seeing. We are seeing increased rigor in what we're doing in schools. Last year, we launched the comprehensive literacy plan, first comprehensive literacy plan the district has had in a long time, that is really focused now from kindergarten through 12th grade, not just around reading, but also writing, comprehension, vocabulary. That is much more rigorous than what you've seen in the district before. We are also launching this year, and have launched this year, a comprehensive math and science plan, which we're very excited about. Again, kindergarten through high school, with strong expectations of what kids are going to be able to learn. Here's what we have seen in terms of some progress that we've made over the past almost 18 months that Dr. Thornton's been here. We've seen our attendance now at 90%, the highest level that it's been in more than a decade. Greatest increases came at the high school level. including our ninth grade kids who went from 76% attendance to over 82% attendance in a 1 year span of time. We have seen increases in the WKCE scores. In fact, our increases at the WKCE level outpaced the state. We have seen increases in our ACT after dropping for years. They're up marginally, and we're still trailing the state, but they are up and they increased at a higher level than the rest of the state. So we don't need to feel outside pressure to do better for kids. We're with these kids every single day, see the issues they face, see the challenges that they bring to school, but also realize the potential that they have to do better, and that it's our job as adults to do what we've done now, which is to chart a course toward improvement.
Well, let me ask you this. What is MPS's assessment of, we call this a serious conversation about Milwaukee's graduation problem. What does MPS see as the graduation problem at all at this point?
Well, I mean, what we see the graduation problem is kind of the obvious. We don't have enough kids who are graduating from high school. So back in 2010, we did a study that actually took a look at why kids aren't graduating. What are those common things that we see in kids who are dropping out of school? We saw that those are kids who have lower attendance rates, which makes sense. You're not going to be able to learn, you're not going to be able to be successful if you're not in class. Those are kids who also were showing deficiencies and not scoring well on those core academic subjects, math, science, reading. We also saw those as kids who were having higher suspension rates. So here's what we've done. We've worked with individual schools to develop plans to help them improve their attendance. Not only that, we track their attendance every single day. In every single school, we can go to a dashboard and see every single day what the attendance is like for kids in that school and where it was the previous day, where it was the previous year. And then our regional executive specialists work with schools to address those problems right away. Not next year, that day.
So you say address the problems. What do they do to address them?
They take a look, and again, it's really done on the individual school level basis. What are some of the reasons that kids aren't in school? Does it involve getting social workers involved because there are issues at home? Is there something as simple as a transportation problem that's stopping a kid from getting to school? It really is drilling down to see what those issues are at the individual school level and attacking those. So that's what we've done around attendance to address that particular factor as it relates to dropouts. We know that kids who are suspended, also at higher rates, are more likely to drop out. So we've begun to aggressively take a look at what we're doing around suspensions, why we're suspending kids, and what kind of interventions need to be done before a child is suspended. That's resulted in us having the lowest suspension rate in the past 10 years in the district. Again, if you suspend kids, they're not in class, they're not going to be able to learn. And finally, the rigor that we're doing around the comprehensive literacy plan and the comprehensive math and science plans really go back to that issue, and doing that from 4-year-old kindergarten through high school, go back to the issue of building up a child's academic ability in those key areas.
I think one of the things that I just wanted to say here, that first of all, I think it's a good point that we need to be thinking about what's working as well as what has to be done. I think as a former teacher and somebody who still very much identifies as a teacher, I think that one of the challenges we face is not only having explicit curriculum, which I think the comprehensive literacy plans are a really solid step, but also recognizing that, as Alan said, that there are real variations, school to school, but I would also say classroom to classroom. Some schools do a better job of hiring a whole bunch of sensational people, but often you'll find, and some of the places like LA among them, that have made test scores public, which I don't agree with, because I think it's such a unilateral measure of complexity. But I think that classroom to classroom, Tyrone might have much better outcomes with his students, and I might be right next door to him and just not be doing as well. And one of the reasons is that teachers apprentice into this profession and then shut those doors and hardly ever get to see other teachers learn from innovative practices after they start teaching. And so I think that one of the things that I've worked on for years before I came to Alverno and now continuing is to help make accomplished teaching public and shareable so that people who are having really sensational outcomes with their kids aren't just having that sensational impact stopping at their classroom door, so that we can say that somebody might be doing a gangbusters job with the comprehensive literacy plan. And why is that? What is she doing that is enhancing the flow of kids around the centers, for example? And some of that relational stuff is hard to see only in test scores or only in the curriculum. You have to see how it's enacted.
But do you evaluate a fourth grade teacher based on how well the fourth graders come out of there, or do you evaluate a fourth grade teacher based on whether their students drop out 5 years later?
Well, I think there's actually some interesting stuff about the effective educator plan that's been coming out in the last couple of weeks that's talking about yes and yes. So there are pieces of all of these things where teachers could be evaluated in part on individual outcomes, in part on fidelity to curriculum, in part on school-wide outcomes or district outcomes or dropout or whatever the district wants to assess. So I think that all those pieces, I mean, you can't just be a stellar teacher by yourself if after they leave you, they go to somebody else and absolutely rescind all the gains they made in your care.
I think you have to take into account two other factors too. Denise laid out, I think, very well what's happening in the district, but then you should look at nearly 20% of the students that are in the Milwaukee Public Schools are special needs students. And they comprise a significant population of those that are suspended, sometimes unnecessarily. There are other interventions that could be applied. They also are the ones that probably have the least number of advocates for them. They do become adults, and they do come out and have the same expectations for entering into the work world that many of the other students that are in regular ed programs would have. The second piece is that MPS is not responsible for all of the kids that are out there that drift in and out of the system. So you've got 20,000 young people who are in choice or charter programs or voucher programs, and those students may start out their experience in education in non-MPS programs and then find their way into MPS high schools. Not as well prepared as they should be or need to be in order to successfully complete a diploma and then move on for education beyond. So these are, I think, two very large factors that loom out there that ask for accountability of those non-MPS schools when it comes to better preparing the young people. We don't have a good system of accountability for all those schools. You've got Catholic schools, you've got Lutheran schools, they've got some system of accountability, but certainly even that is not as strong as the system of accountability that MPS has in place.
Well, Alan Borsak, what is your estimation on how Milwaukee's complex education map plays into this? Because, you know, I have a stack of articles and data that report on voucher schools versus charter schools versus choice schools, and it's hard to know whether we're comparing apples to apples or apples to oranges or apples to giraffes.
Well, that's a really good question. It's beginning to approach 40% of all the school children in Milwaukee who are getting publicly funded education are getting outside of the traditional MPS system. So the role that MPS is playing is frankly shrinking about 1 to 1.5 percentage points a year, which is a form of parental choice in itself, that people are not choosing MPS. That said, I have to admit that as someone who's really followed the voucher program and the charter programs very closely over the years, because they're, you know, of national significance, I've become less interested in whether a school's a voucher school, a charter school, or an MPS school, largely because the actual demonstrated success, to the degree that anyone has a grasp on it, which isn't all that good, I admit, right, but the actual demonstrated success isn't particularly better if you say, oh, I went to a voucher school, I went to a charter school, I went to a MPS school. My question is, what school did you go to? Because some of them are really good and some of them are really bad in all of those programs. and last year was the first time they released WKC scores for the voucher schools. It reinforced what I think everyone already knew, which was that as a whole, the voucher schools weren't doing any better than MPS, which is to say that that's a whole nother level of concern, because that's not so good. I just want to throw out a couple numbers. Denise said the KCE scores went up. In some areas they did last year. Nonetheless, at the 10th grade level, in the 5 areas that the state tests in, reading, literacy, language arts, math, science, and social studies, there's not a single area where the percentage of 10th graders who are rated as proficient by the state is above 40%, or maybe last year I think one category is 41%. So that's like 3 out of 5, and these are the kids who made it to 10th grade, are not rated as proficient by the state. The KCE scores went up last year. They went up from 15.8 to 16. That is at least 7 points below a level of being college ready. And is 6 points below the state average. So the gaps and the statistics we're dealing with here paint a pretty severe picture. And this is not all MPS's fault. I don't want to imply that. But we got some really huge challenges here.
Well, we do have huge challenges, and I think the challenge is for us as a community to look at those challenges that are shared challenges, because these are all our children, and as James Baldwin said, we'll either profit by or pay for what they become. It's particularly a case where, what we notice is, children sometimes move out of these. It's not just mobility within the district. Kids oftentimes move in and out of these systems that we have, like water. They may start at a choice school at the beginning of the year, end up at MPS and move to a charter school, and then come back to us again. So I think as a community, we have to ask ourselves, what's our commitment to making sure that all children have the opportunity to be successful? What is our commitment as a community to help to tackle some of these issues that cause kids to have that kind of movement in and out of schools? I don't care how smart you are. If you're doing that kind of movement from school to school to school because, you're behind in your rent so you're evicted, or, your parents lost their job so you have to move to another house, and so now you're moving to another school. What's our commitment as a community to make sure that we help to stabilize families? So as was talked about earlier, families have the opportunity to be more engaged and more involved in what their children are doing because they don't have these other life skills issues. There's no magical spot where when a child walks through a classroom door, no matter what system they're in, that all those issues that are impacting the way their family lives and what they're living like outside of school just turn off and they're gone.
But how much of the dropout issue is actually even related necessarily to academic achievement? Because you can get a high school diploma with an A average, or you can get a high school diploma with a B average, or a C average, or I imagine a C minus. I guess I don't know what happens if you have a D average, but you could also drop out at any of those points. It sounds like academic achievement is one thing, but all these other factors that play into why someone would stay in school or leave school. You could have a B average and still, if you think your prospects for a job don't exist, you could chuck it in 10th grade and try your luck somewhere else.
Well, that's an issue that both employers and colleges are asking the same question. What is the value of the diploma that they're asked to assess? If you go into industry, and particularly in manufacturing, you know that you're going to have more schooling beyond because of the nature of the industry. But healthcare is the same. Construction industry is the same. You need more beyond just the diploma. And colleges are finding that when young people come to their doorstep, many of them are deficient in basic skills, reading and math in particular, so that they have remediation programs that are either growing or remediation programs that have to be started up in order to help make sure that those kids are successful at their institutions. We're looking at a way of resource sharing. We're certainly looking at ways in which Dr. Burke's institution can be better engaged in helping to ensure that there's proper readiness for those young people who come through with, they got the paper, they celebrated getting the paper. What does that mean? It means that you're going to have to get more than what you've got in your hand, regardless. Even if you have all A's, you're going to find yourself at an institution or in an employment situation where more will be demanded of you.
I think that Desiree said it earlier. I think the one component I would say that has to be looked at is making sure that character, integrity, honesty, moral, and ethics have now become a part of what it is, because I graduated high school with a less than 1 point, but I had this high ACT. It's the same as some kids today, but it was that which got me at least a look at a college, MATC first, and then UWM second. But I had other things in these interviews that people liked, that said that I could do it, that there was some confidence there. So I try to, when I look at young people, I try to know what are these aspects of who you are, as well as what you're doing on paper, because if these are part of what you are, I can help you get to what you need to on paper, because then I can build something from you from the inside out.
And again, it gets back to that readiness. Readiness for what? Readiness to learn, awesome. We can work with that. If we talk about readiness in terms of can you write a flawless essay from the first time you arrive at Alverno College, if we shut the door there, then we're not believing in the value of our educational institution. We say we can teach you if you are open to working really hard. And so it gets back to that whole self-efficacy thing again, and really it gets back to the idea of what people believe of their own brains. It's like Carol Dweck's work that talks about the fact that if you even just tell middle school kids that the brain is a muscle and it gets stronger if you use it, boom, their scores start to change. Just telling them that. It's amazing, because they bring up this idea of like, I'm smart or I'm not smart. And that is somehow part of me, like the color of my eyes, as opposed to the fact that my muscles are this size, and if I work out a lot, they're going to change. And so I think that, to the extent that any educational institution conveys that belief and that commitment to draw out the best self from a student, whether that's a 5-year-old student, an 18-year-old student, a 35-year-old student, that way I think we're starting to deliver.
Do we also have to have a bigger conversation about multi-track education? From time to time we hear about this, the comparison of the American education system to what you see a lot of in Europe, which is preparing one track of kids for one version of college and another track of kids for another version of college, whether it's technical education or otherwise. Are we still too stuck on a one-size-fits-all approach?
One of the things you have to remember, though, that if you're talking about Finland, for example, is that that's one example where they do that, but kids can still move. So this is not an old tracking system like where you are going to work in a factory only and say goodbye to any kind of liberal arts dreams that you might have harbored. But the idea is that if you feel driven to work with your hands, to sculpt, to whatever, to be an architect, that you might follow those dreams and be supported in those. But if you then want to switch, you can. So there's some possibility there that I think is using the terms tracking doesn't help.
But I think there's probably a vast majority of kids in 7th or 8th or 9th grade who don't necessarily harbor art history dreams.
Right. And what a shame that is. I'm saying that only half-kiddingly. I mean, don't we want, at least I do, I want the mechanic who's working on my car to have that same ability to have high-level problem-solving thinking skills as I do if I break my arm and the physician's going to put my arm in a cast. I think we want kids to be able to have some of the same abilities to be able to function well, to do critical thinking, to do high-level math. Those are things I think we want for all kids. Because it's all about making sure that kids have the skill set that they need to be able to take advantage of the opportunities that they wish to pursue.
Mm-hmm. But when you say there's expectations issues, also, I'll give you an example. I went before third graders. I did a diagram of what happens from the sink to Jones Island, or from the toilet to Jones, and they were like, "Oh, and somebody said, well, why would you do this in front of third graders? Because they need to know the concepts of how they live. They need to understand what happens with the water and the end result." Or the same as I did an architecture lesson, and the teacher thought I talked over their head. But yet I did the same architecture engineering lecture to a group of kids outside of Milwaukee, and they sucked it in. I said, well, why would you think these children, who are MPS kids, shouldn't have the same level of career options that the other kids should? I'm supposed to wait till the 8th or 9th grade? No, I want to give them a sense of what an architect or an engineer can do at 5th and 4th grade. I don't need to wait till 8th and 9th grade. But you got to have somebody who expects that they can learn that.
But do you think there's also a message about what we value that needs to change, that there should not be a stigma that stipulates that someone who's a craftsman or a tradesman is somehow less valuable than someone who is an architect or someone who is a radio host.
I think we're slowly growing out of that. I mean, if it doesn't matter how many degrees you have, when that toilet breaks and you got to call a plumber at 50 to 80 bucks an hour, you recognize that he's or she has a skill that you need, and therefore you need to respect the fact that they can do something you can't do. And we did lose that level of respect in our society where it was like, well, I'm going to college, I'm not doing that. I don't need that. We need, and so that is changing as we all understand what it takes for us to live and the kind of skills it takes for us to have a good outcome in our life.
We're preparing kids for a global world of work. And so one of the things we need to think about is how to prepare people who can make a solid contribution. And so the author Daniel Pink, whose work I really admire, talks about this in terms of like thinking about it as these right brain skills that will pass the A test. And he says, is it something that is overly abundant? Then we don't need to be preparing people for that. Is it something that can be automated? We don't need to be preparing people for that as much, maybe fixing the automaticity. But is it something that can be outsourced easily to Asia? You know, all of these things that he talks about that talk about like what is it that we're preparing people for? To be innovative, to be able to fix things when they break, you know, to have these jobs that can't be done by robots.
Well, we're getting a little bit short on time, so I want to give everybody an opportunity to get one last thought in and perhaps direct it at the following question. What should the first step be? We've talked a lot about the graduation problem. If we were in a dream world, where should we start? What should the first thing that we focus on be, and who needs to hear that message?
Oh, me?
Sorry.
I think that whenever I step in front of a group of young people, first thing I say is, all of you here are geniuses until you prove otherwise. Mm-hmm. So I need to make sure they understand I don't come here with any judgment. I'm going to speak to you as you all know it, and if you prove to me otherwise, then we'll have to work on that. But I also tell them another thing. You're also free to be a fool. You are free to reject all I give you and decide you want to go down another track, but there are consequences if you go down that track. And after those you may be back to see me again in the end. So my thing is to build confidence, and give them some avenue that I have faith in their abilities to get what I have or to get it from somewhere else. But I have to first get them to believe, and I spend as much time on getting them to believe as I do on the X's and O's.
I would say if I could do something tomorrow, I would say find me the teachers, and these folks don't hide, the teachers who are doing really, really well with highest need kids, and I want to take a camera into their classroom and I want to ask them what they've worked really hard on doing with those kids. And then I want to share that with other teachers.
I think we're already doing this step through the initiative Milwaukee Succeeds, that the community is galvanizing around goals to have every child in the city of Milwaukee succeed. And we're agreeing on common language, common goals, and what that looks like. I spent the morning at Park Lawn Housing Community talking to a group of parents about Milwaukee Succeeds. We're getting them engaged in this initiative. They were so excited to learn that there was a community effort around helping their children, a very vulnerable population, to succeed. They wanted to learn more. They want to serve on the various councils and advisory teams that we have. So I think we're doing it. It takes a lot of work. It's going to be a long-term initiative, but everyone already at this table I've talked to about and are highly engaged. So it's exciting. We're already doing some steps towards that.
What she said. But in all seriousness, we've invested in a faculty innovation center. It's literally across the hall from my office, and brought together all the kind of pedagogical and technological skill sets that we have on campus. We're a technical college after all, and for the first time we have them all in the same space, so the faculty can learn from each other. And I think you're dead on, because there are some just extraordinarily talented faculty here who don't have a place, or didn't have a place until recently, where they can have the kind of cross-pollination and the kind of technological aha moments that I think are in all of our best interest when it comes to delivering pedagogy at a college level. So we've actually made the investment in infrastructure, in technology, and telepresence, and really where I think education is going digitally in the future, and put it in a place where faculty can have the kind of cross-pollination that you're talking about and learn from each other. That's at the heart of it, I think.
I would probably want to target those fourth graders. It's at the fourth grade that we begin to notice significant growth in the gap, whether it's in reading and math or any of the other areas of achievement that we would like to see students perform better in. And I would ask those students, what can we do to best help you? I think it really does get back to the motivation of students in a large way to want to do better and to find out from them what type of support do they need. Ask their parents, what can we do to support you in helping to ensure that your kids move from fourth grade into some post-high school educational experience. So that's probably where I would begin.
I would say we need to believe that all children have the ability to succeed, that all children have the ability to be high school graduates and to be successful in whatever they decide to do after that. And I think as part of that, we need to be able to celebrate those successes that we have. We're all impatient for success to come quickly. But what we need to do is to understand that as a community, if we believe that all kids have the ability to be successful, and we're willing to work towards that, celebrate the success that they show, we'll be able to get there.
If your question is the first thing to focus on, all the school factors outside of school are important. I don't minimize them, but the first thing to me is to focus on schools because that's the doable arena. So that means, to me, improving teachers and teaching, improving principals and building leadership, relationships between all the parties in the school, the rapport, the rigor of what's done, expectations, including expectations for behavior, energizing the school communities, each school one by one. And that's doable, I think.
I would say changing the messaging to be about attending college as opposed to finishing high school. I really think that if you understand that you have to have the high school degree to get to the college, and everyone here, I think, I would guess, had a similar experience to me where high school wasn't the be-all, end-all. And when you got to college, worlds opened up for you that exposed you to things you never knew and probably even encouraged you to love things that you didn't know about before. And those worlds and doors are closed without that high school diploma. So the focus on college, like Denise said, if we can get that in every school, where kids hear that that is really what their goal should be, I think is a great place to start.
Well, that's going to have to conclude our conversation today. Thanks to all our participants here at the studios of Milwaukee Public Television and to everyone who tuned in via Ustream. Don't forget you can hear excerpts from today's conversation next Tuesday on Lake Effect on Milwaukee Public Radio, and they'll be archived at WUWM.com. You'll also be able to find this broadcast once again at Milwaukee Public Television's website. There's a taping of another television special, December 6th, that's going on at Discovery World, and you are invited to join us for that as well. There is more information about that broadcast and the American Graduate Initiative at mptv.org/AGI. Thanks also to Raul Galvan and the staff at Milwaukee Public Television for the technical and logistical work leading up to today's broadcast. I'm Mitch Teich. Thanks again for tuning in, and have a great day. Thanks.
This program is part of American Graduate. Let's make it happen. A public media initiative made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.